Okay, thanks. Does the sound work? Okay. Yeah, you have to bear with me. If I seem like I'm under the influence of something, it's just the jet lag. So, but it's really great to be here. I've been a big fan of It's Nice Hat for a long time, so it was really an honor to be invited to come. So unfortunately, it's only me today. My other half, Stephanie Weigler, is not able to be here. But just so you know, we're married, we're business partners. We started the company about almost 10 years ago. We're just about 6 months shy of that. So literally we've been sitting within about a meter or two from each other for 10 years, like doing every single thing. So it's very much a studio of the both of us. And I'm not going to talk about too much about working with your spouse, but it's always something that kind of intrigues people, I would say. So a little bit of background, very short. Stephanie's from Germany. She, as with me, we've both been kind of doing artwork throughout our whole life. So very much what we do now just feels a bit like an extension, as if we just kind of continued on from our childhood. She's been painting and drawing since the age of 2, which is unbelievable. And I'm from Texas, so there's obviously this kind of strange mixing of these two very different cultures together, I think, with maybe it comes through our work, it's hard to say, but there's definitely something to that. And we found each other and got together in Brooklyn about 12 years ago. And we've settled in the Williamsburg, Greenpoint area and been there ever since, and kind of seen this sort of transformation of this environment of kind of a place where there was like one restaurant to now the kind of Disneyland that it is in terms of everything and how expensive it's gotten. So it's obviously been big changes. So in a nutshell, we started the Triboro in an effort to kind of have a certain amount of freedom, trying to come up with like a single word for it. That was probably the main thing. You know, we were really kind of tired of having to compromise what were our instincts of design to please the middleman, which was I'm sort of equating as the employer. And we felt that we could really handle projects and clients. And a big thing for us was that we really wanted to dedicate all of our time to only projects that really resonated with us. So we've stayed only 2 people for since we started. And the way we do that is we just simply say no to things that don't really feel right or feel like we've done it before. It was kind of a no-brainer for us just because in looking at other studios that we really admired, they were all one person or 2 people. So it wasn't like as if something that we came up with some amazing formula. It was really just based on seeing what other people were doing. So in 2008, we started. We didn't really have even a client. I think we had kind of one client. I'm going to show this slide just to kind of show Gelman, the guy on the left, was our mentor. We actually met through him, and then he referred us to a single client, Andrew Roth, who's a gallerist in New York. But just to show you, we started with only Andrew, and within a few months, we were super scared because the market had crashed and everything like that. But within a few months, we went through a number of different connections, and then we got to our first kind of big project, which was for Justin Timberlake. So actually, as things were melting down, this project kept us kind of busy for the first 2 years, so I was able to kind of keep our heads above the water for a little while. We did like almost everything for this brand. It was kind of short-lived, but it was, you know, we got them to do this kind of abstraction of the American flag back. It seemed right in 2008 to kind of do this Americana thing, and times have changed perhaps, but it felt kind of cool at the time, which we used on fashion shows and things like that. So I'm just going to do a quick overview of a bunch of slides, things that we've done over the years. You know, I don't have music, so I can just. I'll try to go a little slower, actually. It's you get the tempo, you want to go fast, but it's kind of like. So just kind of a real range of clients. We're going to talk about some projects in detail, but I just wanted to give a sense of sort of the types of things that we're doing: editorial, lots of brands, advertising work, restaurants are kind of a big thing we're doing now. Typography, projects for Google. Yeah, typography again. There's a lot of typography, symbols, branding, more typography, posters, not enough of those, unfortunately. But in New York especially, it's like you don't get those kind of gigs, which is kind of annoying. Brands, complicated subway maps, again, typography. My wife told me not to say but I'm already breaking that, already doing a lot of that stuff. So yeah, so just kind of a sampling of like the different aesthetics that we employ and some of the projects that we've worked on. So how do we do our job, or where do we begin? Like everybody else probably out there, we kind of start always with this blank page. And in some ways, you could think of that, you could think of the process of design as being additive. It's like you start with a blank page and you start adding things into the mix, and then eventually you have something done. But we actually kind of think about it in a subtractive way, which is that you actually start with 1 million ideas or 1 million possibilities, and all you have to do is start eliminating things. So in times when you're sort of having trouble coming up with an idea, what's usually best is to just make a decision, any decision at all, because what happens is it forces you down a certain path. So it's kind of a more positive way of starting. So, so let's say you put some information down, you set it in Helvetica, now you're suddenly like a graphic designer. You're starting to communicate, and communication is something that, we've never really identified ourselves as communication designers, and to be honest, the word communication I don't even particularly like. I think it doesn't fit to like what our studio is interested in. We are, first of all, like everyone's a communicator now, it's like, that everyone sort of has this method of standing and talking and writing tweets and whatever. And so anyway, so it's like it becomes this thing where it's is that what we want to do? And then the thing is, I know why people like communication, because it's like, as opposed to confusion, like communication is like ideal. Obviously, you would prefer communication in that sense. But what we're more interested in, this is my signature, my actual signature. So like, obviously, if you get to this level like this, there's no recognition. Like, it has a personality, it has a fluidity, it has a dynamic quality, but there's no information there whatsoever. So what we're interested in is something like more ambiguity. So like, what is the sort of midpoint between communication and sort of confusion? Something where you're actually engaging an audience in the process. So they're not quite sure what you mean, but they feel something. So like, this is actually this sort of design signature for me. So it was kind of a type play of trying to relate certain letter forms like the H and the Y and the A and the S. But hopefully in the process you create something that is far more memorable and it just kind of connects to people in a different way. So I found this quote from Alejandro Inarritu. I'm sure I'm screwing the pronunciation, but I really like this. The scenes of films I remember the most even now were the scenes where I didn't quite understand what they meant. They took me to a place where I couldn't explain what I was feeling, but where I felt some revelation within myself. And I think it's kind of really says better than we could probably say, just that sense of like the things that you remember are these things that you come back to later on. You're like, you don't quite know what they mean, but maybe you had some idea. So I think what we're striving for is actually something more like meaning, and what I like about the word meaning is it changed depending on who the person is. So everyone can have a different perception as to what something means. So how do you infuse meaning into your work? That's just, who knows, but I'm going to give you like a couple examples of like things that we do or that we think about in order to do that, hopefully. So one thing is, and soul is kind of a big word, especially in the context of graphic design, but when we talk about soul, what we really just mean, in the same way if you're at a dinner party and you're seated next to somebody with zero personality, like, who wants to be experiencing a graphic design without any personality or soul? So it's just really this question of, creating something that is sort of almost human in some ways, something you can relate to. So when you're working with an established brand like Nike or MoMA, some of that soul is already built in. But where it becomes really challenging is if you're working with a new business, because you're essentially kind of giving birth to something. So we've started to do a lot of restaurants recently, and what's really fun about it is it's a little bit like music packaging that we maybe did more in the past, where it doesn't really have to communicate anything. You have to maybe give a certain mood or a certain soul, but that's kind of it. So this is a restaurant in Williamsburg that we just did pretty recently. It started with a blank slate, and we only had the name. We didn't have too much else to go off of, so Sauvage, Wild, and Untamed. And we were thinking about kind of the history of humanity and things like that. So we went back to this kind of primal, the primal nature of man, and we were thinking about kind of early cave paintings with hands and things like that. We thought about printing. And I should mention that the client, in this case, which is not usually the case, they said, do whatever you feel like. So we actually only had to present one idea, but we had to go back and actually experiment because we didn't know what we wanted. So we were playing around with like wood block printing and like doing different compositions, which kind of was interesting, but it didn't quite feel right. We started adding color in, but it was very nebulous. It didn't really have, you couldn't connect with it, and it seemed very arbitrary in terms of the compositions. So then we started thinking about petroglyphs and kind of like early human communication and these kind of symbols that don't mean anything to us now because they are from the past and they might have meant something at some point. But they've lost that. But there's something about them, like when you look at the shapes themselves, they give you a certain personality. So like if it's sharp or if it's curvy or something like that. So no one told me about this here. This is, okay, but, so that was a surprise when I saw that today. But so what we did was we decided to go with cut paper because we felt like it was the most, as a designer or somebody who's interested in art, it's kind of where you start with. You kind of are sitting in kindergarten and you're cutting paper, so it's the most primal sort of first thing that you do. And so we were working with paper, and what we were trying to do was create a series of designs that could kind of almost be almost like a language in the end that we could use. We paired that with some typography that Stephanie had designed, which then became like neon signage and things like that. So we had these kind of symbols, but they were very flat. And then at the time, we were kind of interested in Luis Barragán, the architect, and we felt like what we're missing is sort of a three-dimensional aspect. So using paper again, Stephanie started creating these kind of three-dimensional spaces and environments with the paper, and then photographing them. So we thought maybe there's some way that we could actually just kind of put these things together ultimately, which we did. So so then what happens is what's great with a restaurant is you have this kind of toolkit of imagery, and you could call it artwork or not, but you can just kind of use it on everything. So what's beautiful about the restaurant is like this kind of flexibility. So you have menus, you have the business cards where you can kind of then explore the entire range of designs, tote bags. It's like all the kind of typical things dealing with typography. These matches are like ridiculous. They're actually quite huge, as you can kind of see with the coin there. And we literally get 2 or 3 times a week, we get calls from designers. Where did you print these matches? So like, we're very interested in products that kind of stand out, that kind of connect with people or resonate with people that they can kind of take with them and enjoy. Yeah, so some coasters, takeout cups, and just kind of exploring the whole system in a way that feels very fun and to not feel repetitive, which is obviously something that when you're dealing with identity systems, you want a certain consistency, but you also want flexibility. And these are like this kind of, there's like this magic balance that you have to kind of always reach, and it can be very difficult because you want it consistent in the sense that, you want people to see one of these and connect it to all the other ones. So you have to build in certain connective tissue. On the other hand, we want it to have a lot of variety. So that comes from sort of just playing around and doing a lot of different designs and different shapes and building that into the system. Okay, so that's kind of trying to build a soul. The other thing that we like to do is we take things that are already established and already kind of in people's minds, and we try to hack them or do something to them that makes people see them in a very different way, hopefully. So one of our more famous projects would be this one. So Nike came to us with a really interesting challenge. They asked us to create a logo for the city of New York, but that is also related to Nike. And we thought kind of immediately about the landscape of logos in New York and how there are all these kind of different typographic interpretations, and obviously there's hundreds more. So we didn't want to add to that noise. We wanted something that related back to Nike directly so that people would have that connection. And we were also thinking about doing something that was a little bit like do-it-yourself culture, because what's nice about New York, or what we like about it, is it has a sort of entrepreneurial spirit, and like, yeah, everyone just feels like they can just do anything. So how do we bake that in? So we thought what would be best if somehow the logo emanated out of the Nike logo itself, and we recognized that by just kind of removing certain portions of the logo, we can actually say NYC. And what we really liked about it also was that you could do it yourself. You know, if you had an old Nike t-shirt, you could kind of transform it in a few minutes to say NYC. So it's like this fusion of these two icons in a way that relates the city and the brand and people, and engages people to kind of put these things together. So we showed Nike also then, you know, how you can repurpose old old ads. Excuse me. We made neon signage, which kind of flipped back and forth. We also, you know, took old hats and we kind of ripped out the stitching to do that. And then Nike went and like produced this in like tons of different ways, like kind of hundreds of events and like a lot of products and stuff like that. And you know, it was good on social media because people could kind of interact with it and stuff. So it was really awesome to kind of see how that came about ultimately, in, you know, billboards and things like that. And then another hack that's kind of near and dear to our heart is the subway map. So essentially we'd been, you know, obviously New Yorkers, we've been riding in the subway for many years, and we always just hated the map, you know, it was like terrible. So at some point we decided we're just going to like redesign it. So we started doing that. You know, some problems with the map is it's like super geographically inaccurate, so what we thought we'd do is try to make it more accurate. So you see the one on the left is the actual map, and then we kind of made Manhattan actually look like Manhattan, which is good. And we kind of came to a point where we had this sort of design that had more clarity, it had more hierarchy, it had a limited number of angles and things like that. And you know, we got in all the information, which was like a huge amount of work. We designed typefaces for this. We like drew every line, so it's very much like kind of a labor of love in terms of producing it. And then we thought about it, and we thought, well, we don't want to just kind of bring into the world another map, you know, that kind of looks like other subway maps, because like all over the world you have these maps, and they're all happen to be color-coded. And we said, well, wouldn't it be weirder if you had like a map where there was no color, or something like this? So we came up with the idea of just doing a one-color subway map. So we kind of we went back to the drawing board slightly and changed it, and then we released then the one-color subway map. And initially we did some like kind of guerrilla postings in the stations. So we put these up, photographed them. We watched people interact with them. You know, like this woman was super confused. And the funniest thing was she didn't realize that it had changed, but she knew that she suddenly was having difficulties. So it was interesting. But yeah, it got some reaction, and you know, we got some really negative reactions. This is from print magazine, so there's some hate out there for it. But overwhelmingly, the reaction was positive, and we were selling them and kind of giving them away to friends as well. And you know, it was just amazing seeing like people hanging them up in spaces and interacting with them and enjoying them. And it even showed up in like catalogs, but we didn't get paid for that. But it's just sort of like, you know, as this props that people use. And great thing was we got to meet Massimo Vignelli. And he was super nice, but he totally didn't get the whole concept. He was like, why didn't you just use more than one color? And we were just like, well, that's the idea. But it was really great to meet, one of your idols and sit with him and talk about it. So recently we just revisited the project, and this one is now the wrong color subway map. And we couldn't think, well, basically we had a whole problem. We wanted to do something else, and we were like, well, what else could we do? We thought of wrong color. So basically all the colors are just wrong. And this was kind of problematic because you're like, well, you could use any color on Earth, so how do you make a decision? So we ultimately kind of came up with this notion of there's a RGB map, which is on the left, and then the CMY map. So that was the kind of conceptual underpinning for the design. And again, just some details on kind of the level that we went to was creating, again, custom typefaces as well. Yeah, and you kind of see them in spaces. So, did I do that really fast? So actually I threw in an image that Stephanie would never wanted me to put in here. I've tried it in the past, but to no avail. So I wanted to do a little quiz. And what do you see here? Bear and a dog, exactly. So, so this is a rock that I found when I was a kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old. I was in a riverbank, and I was just kind of noticed some rock. I think I probably saw it on the bear side and picked it up and thought it's a bear. And I turned it over, and lo and behold, there was a dog on the other side. And I just really like it in terms of, I still have it on my shelf, and I just really like it in terms of kind of design, the way it sort of brings up these issues about doing design that is very visible but almost invisible. It's nature created this rock over whatever millions of years, or something. But as humans, we recognize something in it, and there's just something totally cool about that. And maybe something in terms of what we would like to do with design as well, to kind of create things that are, that get your attention, but they integrate into the landscape as well. There's just something that feels good about it. Yeah, so that's the end.